Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess I should say now. Happy Friday. It is September the 18th, 2020, the longest year on record in human history, I would assume. We are here for a special edition of Don't Call This a Podcast. I am extremely excited about our guest today, and I want to make sure I get the credentials pulled up so I read it correctly. He is the son of Korean immigrants, an individual of many firsts who has served as the representative of District 101 for 2 terms. Sam Park is the first Asian American Democrat elected to the state assembly and the first openly gay man elected as well. He's a graduate of Georgia State University, go Panthers, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Economics and a BA in Political Science in 2009. He also attended law school at Georgia State, where he earned his Juris Doctor before earning an LLM at American University Washington College of Law. He was featured in the keynote address of the 2020 Democratic National Convention, has worked for the likes of Stacey Abrams and Jason Carter, just to name a few. Beyond that, Sam is an advocate for healthcare. He decided to run in 2016 after his mother's cancer diagnosis, seeing how having access to healthcare helped extend a grim prognosis. While she eventually did succumb to her disease, she was able to spend more time with her family because of access to Medicare. He's an inspirational story and an inspiring person. Also, probably one of the most consistent and greatest smiles in Georgia politics. Please welcome Sam Park to the program. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm again extremely happy that you agreed to do this. Very grateful that you responded to our outreach. So we'll go ahead and get into things because again, you've talked a lot about your background, about kind of the intersectionality of where you sit. And to borrow a quote from you directly, you said, I feel that being myself, I have the opportunity to build bridges between communities that haven't seen eye to eye or may not have necessarily been aware of one another. This is one of the first interviews you gave after your 2016 victory. Can you talk about that intersectionality that you find yourself in when it comes to representation?
Yeah, so I think representation matters, and it's important to see yourself in positions of power and elected office, especially as our country is continuing to diversify and change and move forward. That said, I think it's also important to, one, celebrate our diversity. Every single one of us are multifaceted individuals. For me, I may sit at a unique intersection as a openly gay Korean American millennial person of faith attorney. But again, I think, one, that diversity should be celebrated, but at the same time also understand that there is far more that unites us than divides us. And I think in this country in particular, in this moment in time, I think we should be able to do both, right? Celebrate our diversity as well as recognize that we're all Americans, that we're all Georgians, and to ensure that there's that unity in the midst of that diversity as well.
Well, and we'll dive into policy-related questions soon, but I kind of want to piggyback off of that because you talk about being somebody who is the son of immigrants, who is a kind of first, second-generation American. You have passed resolutions that have focused on reasonable access to public services for non-English speakers, comprehensive civil rights legislation to protect individuals from discrimination in places like housing, public spaces, and more. Recognition of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So you're not just someone who talks game or speaks on it, but you do it. How important is it when some of your colleagues may not let it go further than a resolution or bringing a bill to the floor? How important is it that you continue to voice these issues and concerns along with some of your other colleagues?
I think it's incredibly important, one, to demonstrate to constituents and voters at large of what I stand for and what I'm fighting for and what's possible. When it comes to bills in particular, I think it is challenging to pass anything as a member of the minority. That said, I've been able to pass a good number of resolutions, which I'm very proud of. And in doing so, we're enshrining these truths within our state's history, where folks have an opportunity to look back and see some of the work that we did. Along those lines, I think introducing bills, even if the likelihood of them passing is small, you're giving folks an opportunity to know not just what you stand for, but to give them opportunities to start building off of the work that you've begun. And ultimately, I think that will serve as a blueprint for when we do serve in the majority, when there is a new majority in the state house, in which we can actually make progress on those issues that we've been fighting for.
Well, I think you make a good point there, because we are at the point where there's a possibility of a house flip, especially this fall. Sorry, my microphone just fell down. That wouldn't be of much use, especially this fall, where I think Democrats are in need of 14 to flip 14 seats in order to get 16. Okay, I'm sorry, 16 seats in order to get a majority. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because we have a lot of promising candidates on the ballot. We've spoken to a few of them, one in particular, Rebecca Mitchell, in District 106. Can you talk about kind of how inspiring it is to see sort of this progressivism happen in a state that's long to the outside thought of as conservative, to see it finally start to come to fruition?
Yeah, so for me, it's incredibly exciting. And I'll go back to kind of 2016 when I was a first-time candidate. I think I was the only or one of two Democrats that won in the entire state of Georgia during that time. And how I describe myself is essentially a crack in the dam. In 2018, I think we flipped 10, 11 seats. And so the floodgates open, and now come 2020, we have an opportunity to bring that all the way through. For me, my election in 2016 made me realize that the democratic process is still very much alive and well. I don't come from money. I don't come from a politically connected background. And most folks on both sides of the aisle didn't think I had a shot at winning. But in talking to voters and sharing my story and letting them understand what I was running for, and then also trying to understand what they cared about, finding that common ground, that gave me an opportunity to win back then. And I think what we're seeing in the state of Georgia is the people rising up. They want representation that has their best interest at heart. And so that gives me hope, despite how very concerning a lot of things are, especially at the national level when it comes to our politics.
Yeah, and so I do want to kind of continue to put off of that. You talk a little bit about not coming from political background or having the built-in base, money, things of that nature. You were able to get your foot in the door with some pretty notable figures in terms of just kind of understanding politics, understanding law, things of that nature. On top of your educational background, you've been able to work with Stacey Abrams, Jamie Raskin, Jason Carter, John Ossoff. How did that behind the scenes work prepare you for your run and your service?
So I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great leaders. And to a certain degree, I would attribute the opportunities I've had to each and every one of them. With Stacey Abrams as an example, I was very concerned about a bill back in 2012 where they were going to drug test TANF recipients, 70% of TANF recipients being women and children. And so I went into her office asking her, what can I do to help kill this bill? And she opened the door for me. She gave me a start in Georgia politics and allowed me to work with her team at the time. Same with Jason Carter's gubernatorial campaign. I kind of walked up off the street, asked how can I get involved, and I ended up doing a third of his research and wrote talking points for a gubernatorial candidate. I think the fact that those kinds of leaders open the door for the next generation speaks volumes about their character and their understanding of how to bring about the kind of change we need. I think I feel very fortunate in having worked with these kinds of elected officials and community leaders, and that they're doing this for the right reasons, right? One, their focus is on policy, on good public policy that will lift regular people up, especially when it comes to access to healthcare, addressing income inequality, continuing the march for justice when it comes to criminal justice reform, so on and so forth. And then two, I think their intent is clear based on their actions in terms of why they're doing this kind of work. Right, they're not running for themselves, especially when it comes to Stacey, where you look at her life's work, which has been focused on empowering people, on getting them registered to vote, and ultimately ensuring that we have free and fair elections such that the people's voice can be heard through the process.
Well, and to kind of jump on that and to sort of veer into the policy standpoint, you made healthcare cornerstone of your campaign. You talked about the story with your mother and her fight with cancer. But even beyond that, just kind of recognizing and realizing the role that Medicare and Medicaid can play in saving lives. So you've actively fought to expand these programs in Georgia. And even in I think last year in 2019, when there were proposals on the table, you were adamant that they didn't go far enough. What was it about those proposals for Medicare and Medicaid expansion just didn't really do it for you, or did you think wouldn't really do enough for the people of Georgia?
Yeah, so to take a step back on a few issues when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid, at the state level, we have an opportunity to expand Medicaid, not necessarily Medicare. And I think, oftentimes, especially a lot of my progressive friends are saying, are you for Medicare for all? Well, of course, we need to do everything we can to expand access and ensure that we have universal health care. But if you want to achieve universal health care, that requires states expanding their Medicaid programs. Back in 2014, the Republican-led legislature blocked Medicaid expansion under the Deal administration. And so for years, more than 500,000 low-income Georgians have had no access to healthcare and still don't. When Governor Kemp came into office, I was excited and cautiously optimistic in his Medicaid waiver proposal, and that could have been a step in the right direction. In actually seeing the waiver proposals, however, I think it's a half step, which more likely than not would result in further exacerbating a lot of the healthcare issues that Georgia faces. So there's two components to the Medicaid waiver proposals. One is the 1115 waiver, and the other is the 1332 waiver. When it comes to the 1115 waiver, the governor's proposal, which has already been submitted to CMS, would cover a fraction of the uninsured population, about 50,000 uninsured out of more than 500,000 uninsured low-income Georgians, and it would place work requirements. And so what that tells you is that there's a lack of understanding there, where if you want to be an effective worker, you need to be healthy. But if you're going to put barriers where you have to work in order to get health care, again, it demonstrates a lack of understanding to the fundamental need and reason why we need to expand access to healthcare for all Georgians, which has an enormous beneficial long-term economic impact. And so was very concerned about the 1115 waiver. When it comes to the 1332 waiver proposal, there's two components in that. One is a reinsurance program, which many other states have effectively implemented and has lower premiums for private insured plans. The other component, again, is very concerning in that it would undermine healthcare.gov, the federal marketplace, by redirecting individuals to private insurance companies' websites. This plan would also permit non-standard plans to be sold to customers such that it would provide them a false sense of security and ultimately potentially result in higher expenses, higher costs for them with less coverage, such that when they actually get sick and they need access to healthcare, they individually, folks would be liable for catastrophic healthcare costs. So when it comes to the 1332 waiver proposal, I would strongly encourage people to submit a public comment. Today, the deadline is in 5 days on September 23rd. HHS extended the deadline about a week. But this is a great opportunity to make sure that your voice and your concerns are heard.
Where can they go to voice those concerns for 1332?
Go to covergeorgia.org. That's coverga.org.
Okay, I'm going to put that up here real quick before I forget. But I do want to ask you, kind of going back to the 1115, how much of that do you think really has to do with just some people being out of touch with what a lot of Americans, probably the majority of Americans, face when it comes to finding healthcare, having access to the funding necessary? Do you think it's kind of just being out of touch?
Without a doubt, I think that's a big factor. I think politics also, unfortunately, plays a big reason as well. We've seen more than 37 plus states expand their Medicaid programs to great success. We've seen uninsured rates decrease. We've seen the price of private premiums go down for those who are already insured. And we've seen that Medicaid expansion is a job creator. Georgia, because we have failed to expand Medicaid due to Republican leadership, we now have the second highest uninsured rate in the country. We've had 9 rural hospitals shut down, and all of this continues to exacerbate a lot of the other healthcare challenges that we face, including the maternal mortality rate in this nation, or in Georgia, which is the highest in the country, essentially meaning that Georgia is the most dangerous place for a woman to have a child, which is just so contrary to all the talk that you'll hear of especially from pro-life folks. As well as the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which is something that I work on addressing in my private capacity. But healthcare, and of course, in the midst of this pandemic, the lack of action, the obstruction that we've seen from the Republican Party, I think, has left our state that much more vulnerable in the midst of this once-in-a-century type pandemic. And again, it's incredibly concerning. And I hope your watchers and anybody who understands. You may hear Republicans say the same thing as Democrats on healthcare, but look at their actions, right? If we have Republicans in power, the status quo is going to remain, especially when it comes to healthcare. I think there's a lack of understanding, but also a lack of political will because they've dug themselves into such deep of a hole when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, and I do want to remind people that the president is acting in court trying to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. And along with that, he's wanting to put people like Tom Cotton on the Supreme Court. So national action is important as well as local action. And you touched on HIV and AIDS work. And before I kind of get into the question I had planned, you talked about some stuff that you do privately. If you don't mind, do you mind sharing any information that you're doing?
Sure. So Georgia, we're a part-time legislature. We get paid $17,000 a year. That is not a livable wage, to say the least, despite this being a pretty full-time job. In my private capacity, I'm an attorney. I have the opportunity to serve as general counsel for Positive Impact Health Centers, one of the largest HIV/AIDS service organizations in Georgia. They've been on the front lines of the epidemic, trying to end the epidemic for decades now. Our primary focus is, provide preventative and treatment services to those at risk of HIV and those living with HIV, especially in that, with medication, the life expectancy of someone who is HIV positive is just as long as someone who is HIV negative, so long as you have access to medication. But yet, we still have 20,000 HIV positive individuals in the metro Atlanta area who are out of care. And of course, the lack of access to healthcare from the state level just does nothing to help to save lives and to end this epidemic that's claimed millions of American lives over the past few decades.
And you've put bills to the floor and resolutions to the floor revolving HIV and AIDS. Both 158 and 719 are aimed at increasing access to HIV and AIDS treatment and aimed at modernizing Georgia's outdated laws. You've done 10 bills in total, ranging from insurance regulations to the aforementioned insurance and AIDS focus. I say these things to commend you and for being an advocate and fighting for people, but I also want you to tell us how we can help get things done when it comes to these concerns.
Help us elect Democrats. Quite frankly, I think, the only way in which we'll be able to make meaningful progress on a lot of these issues is if we have a new Democratic majority in the state of Georgia who, one, acknowledges the problems that we face, because if you ignore them, then, nothing's going to happen. So first and foremost, we have to understand that the challenges we face are significant. And then, finding common ground, not just within our party, but with folks on the other side of the aisle. We need to understand that the problems that we're trying to solve affect all of us, regardless of whether you are a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican. Healthcare is a matter of life or death for all of us. And ultimately, I think in order to solve a lot of the real big structural challenges that we face, we have to find common ground. We have to work together. But I think the only way in this moment in time in which we're going to be able to have that kind of progress or see that kind of progress is if we elect Democrats up and down the ticket.
Along those lines, I do want to kind of mention how, your 2016 race was very, very close. I think you won by what, a single percentage point, maybe two. So you're running for a third term. You're running to be the representative of District 101 once again. What is kind of the best message that you can push to them about why they should send you back to the Golden Dome?
Rise up. For me, and one of the things I keep telling folks, it's not just about me. It's not just about one race. It's about electoral change. It's about the people. We need to continue to vote to ensure that the democratic process, which as imperfect as it has been, has allowed us to make progress on a critical number of issues and has consistently allowed us over the past century or so to expand freedoms. Such that we are continuing to live up to our founding principles of ensuring liberty and justice for all. When it comes to liberty, at the very least, we could prohibit discrimination. When it comes to housing, public accommodations, and employment, which Georgia is, I think, one of 3 states that does not have those sorts of protections. When it comes to ensuring justice for all, we need to continue our work with criminal justice reform. We need to ensure measures for police accountability and make other reforms, especially when it comes to the decriminalization of HIV, of marijuana, so on and so forth. My platform generally is fairly broad, but I'm running for a healthier, stronger Georgia by expanding access to healthcare, continuing that fight, and of course doing everything that we can to end this pandemic that we're in the midst of. Second, I'm running to protect the American dream. And I think there are 3 critical elements of that. One, we have to protect our democratic process for the reasons that I just elucidated earlier. And ensure that we have democracy reforms, such as taking money out of politics, ensuring independent redistricting reform, and again, in order to empower the people. To protect the democratic process that's allowed us to be the strongest country and one of the greatest nations on earth. We also, as part of protecting that American dream, we need to invest in people. We need to invest in the working class families and lift them up. The wealth and income inequality that's been exacerbated over the past few decades is incredibly dangerous, I think, especially to our democratic process, where that concentration of wealth ultimately will undermine our ability as people to determine the direction of our future. And then lastly, we need to educate. We need to invest in the education of folks from pre-K to K through 12 to higher education, so that folks can make these sorts of important decisions on a reasonable basis. And by doing all of that, I think we can continue to do the hard work of perfecting our union and ensuring liberty and justice for all.
Well, you ran through a couple of the questions that I was going to ask you. I'm happy for that because you touched on a lot of issues that I did want you to get to. And I do want to kind of touch on one more thing before we go. You were a Hope Scholar. You made the point that the Hope Scholarship is what got you through your education at Georgia State. It's what allowed you to attend. And you co-sponsored the College Completion Access Act, which would remove a provision of Hope that basically gives Hope a 7-year cutoff after high school. Why is this important to you? Why do you take up this battle? And what can that mean for Georgians moving forward?
Higher education, I think, is critically important because our economy is rapidly changing and technology is accelerating such that we are moving toward a knowledge-based economy. Whether it's through technical college or requiring a bachelor's degree or higher, the jobs of the future, especially with automation, getting rid of a lot of blue-collar jobs, are going to require additional training and thinking. And so I think with that understanding, we have to increase access, particularly to higher education, remove any barriers that may have been put into place for different reasons in the past, with the understanding that if we're going to address and overcome the challenges of the future and prepare our communities to thrive in these new challenging environments, those are the steps that we're going to have to take.
Sam Park, District 101. Where can they find you? What's your best place? How can they help you? Where can they donate? What do you want to push before we go?
You go to www.samforgeorgia.com. That's my website. You can read more about me. You can take a look at some of the bills that I've introduced and also make a donation, a contribution to my campaign. I would love all the support that I can get. We are facing a campaign contribution deadline in about 12 days on September 30th. So yeah, please contribute so I can continue this work I'm doing in Georgia.
Well, don't go anywhere yet. Go ahead and end this broadcast. Thank everybody for tuning in. SamForGeorgia.com is where you can go. This will be up later on, audio version on the kidsworkarounds.com. Please go check out the episode we did yesterday for our Don't Call This a Podcast series. Make sure, as I say every single time, that you go and vote this fall. Know who your representatives are. Look them up, search them. And I promise you, if you send them a message, they will respond to you. They are eager to hear from you. So Sam, thank you so much for your time today. Like I said, hang tight. I'm going to talk to you when we head off air. But any parting words for everybody?
Again, I think we're facing one of the most important elections of our lifetime. Use the power you have. Vote, vote, vote.
Thank you so much, y'all. Have a wonderful afternoon.